Welcome to this comprehensive course on ISC2 Certified in Cybersecurity certification. Whether you are new to cybersecurity or looking to solidify your foundational knowledge, you are in the right place. This course is structured according to the official ISC2 certification exam objective, ensuring that you get the exact knowledge needed to pass the exam with confidence. In this series, we will be diving deep into each of the five domains covered in the ISC2 CC exam. We are starting today with Domain 1 Security Principles. My goal is to make this learning journey as smooth and effective as possible. So get ready to take notes and ask questions in the comments. This is not just about passing an exam, it's about building a solid foundation for a successful cybersecurity career. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming videos in this series. Let's get started with Domain 1 Security Principles. So, now let's talk about the exam weights of different domains. So, the exam has basically five domains. The first one is the security principle, which has the highest weightage of 26%. The second domain is business continuity, disaster recovery, and incident response, which has the least weightage of 10%. Third domain is access controls concepts, having 22% of overall weightage. Fourth domain is the network security with 24% weightage, and the last and fifth domain is security operations, having 18% of weightage in overall exam content. So now let's start with the actual content of the course. So the first objective, that is objective 1.1, is understand the security concepts of information assurance. And the first topic is the CIA triad. So the CIA basically stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these three are basically the pillars of the cyber security controls and concepts. And we will study each one by one, its definition and different examples of each type of these pillar and how to ensure them in our cyber security operations. So the first one of the CIA triad is the confidentiality. And confidentiality basically ensures that sensitive data is only accessible to authorized people, systems, or processes. In other words, it stops unauthorized users from seeing, stealing, or altering private information. So, how do we ensure the confidentiality? So, techniques like encryption, access controls, and passwords help maintain confidentiality. So, encryption is the most common method of ensuring the confidentiality of sensitive information. Similarly, access control and passwords are also used to ensure the confidentiality of sensitive data and information. So now let's go through some examples of the confidentiality. So encryption, it protects emails or files so that only authorized recipients can read them. Access control, so restricting access to sensitive systems like financial databases to specific and authorized employees. So another example of ensuring confidentiality is data masking, which is hiding parts of sensitive information such as displaying only the last four digits of the credit card number. Two-factor authentication, that is 2FA, requiring a password and a code sent to your phone to access an account, is an example of ensuring confidentiality. And non-disclosure agreement, that is NDAs. So these are legal agreements to ensure individuals don't share confidential information. They bind the employees of an organization against disclosing or exposing the sensitive information of the organization where they are employed. The next pillar of CIA triad is the integrity, which is keeping information correct, unaltered, that is preventing unauthorized changes. We can also say the prevention of tampering of information. So, protection from tampering, it ensures data cannot be modified, deleted, or corrupted by unauthorized individuals. Verification, so techniques like checksum or digital signatures verify data has not been altered during transmission or storage. So, the digital signature basically uses hashing. So, hashing is the primary method that ensures that information is not altered or changed. Now, some integrity examples. So, it is used in bank transaction for ensuring that amount transferred from one account matches the amount received without unauthorized changes. So, let's suppose, for example, if you transfer 100 USD to someone else's account, so the integrity ensures that exactly 100 USD is received. If integrity was not ensured, the user may receive, let's suppose, 10 USD. So that's why integrity is very important in bank transaction. Software download. So using checksum, for example, MD5 or SHA to confirm that a downloaded file has not been tampered with. So you must have seen that when you download some files, there is a hash file available with the download. So it is to ensure that the file has not been changed during the download. So when you download the file, you can take the hash of the file, calculate the hash of the file, and compare it with the one that was available with the file. If both the hashes matches, it means the file has not been tampered with. Medical records, so protecting patient data to ensure that no authorized edits or deletions occur in health records. Email security, so digital signatures verify that an email has not been altered after it was sent. Database protection, so ensuring logs and entries in a company database remain unmodified by unauthorized users. So usually, when attackers or hackers hack a system, they try to remove or change the logs so that they can erase their tracks. So that's why the protection of logs through integrity is very important, so that we can see that who accessed the system and at which times. The next important pillar of CIA trade is the availability, which is the availability basically ensures that systems, data, and resources are accessible to authorized users whenever needed. So availability basically minimizes downtime. So it focuses on reducing disruptions caused by hardware failures, cyber attacks, or maintenance. And availability can be ensured through backup and recovery. So strategies like backups, redundancy, and failover systems are used to keep services running smoothly. So now let's go through some example of availability. So web servers with load balancer ensures websites stay online even during high traffic by distributing load across multiple servers. So basically, the load balancer and multiple web servers ensure availability. So the basic purpose of the load balancer is first to distribute the traffic evenly among the servers, and second, if one or let's suppose two web servers goes offline due to any reason or malfunctions, the user don't see any disruption because the load balancer is aware of the offline servers and the traffic is distributed among the remaining live servers. So the load balancer do not send the traffic to unavailable or offline servers. and in this way it keeps the services available. Cloud storage backup, so allow users to access their files anytime, if even if one storage server fails. Uninterrupted power supplies, that is UPS, which keeps system running during power outages to prevent downtime. Redundant internet connections, so businesses use multiple ISP, that is internet service providers, so operation continue if one connection or one ISP fails. Disaster recovery sites, so secondary data centers ready to take over if primary center goes offline. So the cloud provider, for example, AWS, they have multiple data centers, and that's why they are all time available, because if one data center of Amazon AWS fails, users are seamlessly routed to the other data center without any disruption. So another concept is the non-repudiation. So what is non-repudiation? Non-repudiation ensures that a person or system cannot deny actions they performed, like sending a message or signing a document. Digital evidence. So the non-repudiation basically uses methods like digital signatures and logs to provide the solid proof of those actions. And accountability. So this builds trust and accountability in communication or transactions by holding parties responsible for their action. So non-repudiation basically ensures accountability. So some examples of non-repudiation: digital signature. So signing a contract electronically with a private key ensures the signer cannot deny it. So what does this mean? It means that when a user signs an information or any document with his or her private key, it can only be decrypted with the corresponding public key. So the public key is available with everyone, and the private key is only available with the user. So if the user signs something with his or her private key, and the receiving party decrypts it with the public key, it means that the document was sent or signed by the, let's suppose, party A. So in this way, it ensures the non-repudiation. The party A cannot deny that he or she did not sign or encrypted the document, because only party A has the access to the private key. So blockchain transactions, so cryptocurrency transfers are recorded immutably on the blockchain audit log. So system log user actions like accessing sensitive files as evidence. Biometric access, so fingerprint scans for system access provide individual responsibility. Payment confirmation, so receipts and transaction IDs verify completed purchases. So another important concept, that is triple A, which stands for authentication, authorization, and accounting. So we will study these three one by one. So authentication is the process of verifying the identity of a user, device, or a system to ensure that only authorized entities gain access to resources. Examples. So it typically involves validating credentials such as passwords, biometrics such as fingerprints, or security token. So these all three are the types of authentications. Next is the authorization. So authorization is the process of determining and granting a user's permission to access specific resources, perform certain action, or use particular services based on their verified identity. So what does this mean? This means that authorization usually takes place after authentication. So usually first logs in, and then he or she can access the resources, for example, a website or some files inside the storage. Another term is accounting. So, accounting or auditing refers to tracking and recording a user's activities such as access to resources, performed actions, and system usage. Example include login and logout logs and command execution log. So as we studied in the previous slide, accountability. So these are related terms. So accounting or auditing are used to ensure accountability and track the user and system actions. So now different authentication types. So how the people are authenticated into systems and resources. So they are authenticated on the basis of something they know or something you know. So uses knowledge-based authentication like passwords or pins. For example, entering a passphrase to log in. The second authentication type is something you have, which involve possession-based authentication like a smart card, security token, or mobile device. So, for example, using a hard token for two-factor authentication. So, when you log into your email, for example, Gmail, you enter your password, and then you receive a code or notification or your mobile phone. So, this is something you have. That mobile phone is with you, and this the password and the mobile basically they form the two-factor authentication. Another authentication type is something you are. So these employs biometric authentication such as fingerprints, retina scans, or facial recognition. Example include unlocking a phone with a fingerprint. And another authentication factor is somewhere you are, which relies on a location based authentication, for example, a GPS or an IP address. Example include restricting a system access to specific region. For example, let's suppose the ISC2, we have the isc2.org website. So the ISC2 organization can restrict this website to specific region. For example, let's suppose it may be inaccessible in country X due to any region, and user from this region X cannot access the website. And so this type of authentication is based on somewhere you are. So besides authentication, people, we also authenticate devices and system. So the purpose of devices and systems are that it ensures only authorized devices and system can access the network or resources, reducing the risks of unauthorized access. And methods include certificate, device biometrics, unique identifiers like MAC address, or TPM, which is a chip that stands for Trusted Platform Module. So this chip is basically available inside devices such as laptops, and it contains cryptographic key and is used for authentication as well as encryption. So the biometric does not mean the fingerprint or facial recognition. It means the footprint or specific identification of the device itself. Mutual authentication means that both the client and server verify each other's identity for secure communication. For example, during SSL or TLS handshake. Device certificates, so digital certificates assigned to devices to verify their identity in secure environments. And zero trust model, so devices must continuously verify trustworthiness even if inside the network perimeter. So zero trust model ensures that no device is trusted by default even if it is inside the company secure parameter. The device must itself verify continuously. So now coming to the multi-factor authentications or MFA. So there are multiple factors in MFA. The first one is something you know, which is by definition that the information only the user know. For example, the password, pins, security question. So this is the type that is known as something you know. Another factor is something you have, which is a physical item in the user's possession. For example, your smartphone, smart cards, or tokens. And its strength is that it requires physical theft to compromise. So the something you know has the vulnerability or weakness of guessing. For example, if someone knows you, he can guess your password by your birthday or your favorite color or car or favorite movie. While the something you have, for example, you have if you have your smartphone, it must be stolen in order to be used. And the third factor is something you are, and it is unique biological characteristic, for example, fingerprints, facial features, iris patterns, and it is extremely hard to replicate or forge. So you can say that this one, something you are, which consists of biological characteristic, is the strongest of all of these three. And the fourth one is somewhere you are, which is geographic or network-based location. An example include access granted based on IP address, GPS, or Wi-Fi location. And use cases include denying access if a user's location deviates from expected parameters. So the summary includes that MFA combines multiple factors. So multi-factor authentication, as we study these four factors, so you must combine any of these factors to make it a MFA. So enhances security by requiring at least two independent factors. And the factors include something you know, something you have, something you are, somewhere you are. So remember, if you use a security question plus a password or a PIN, so it is not a true MFA because these both belongs to the same factor that is something you know. So the MFA must have different factors. So for example, a security pack question plus fingerprint, you can say that this is an MFA because it combines two factors. Effective implementation. So balance user convenience and security using suitable technologies, for example, biometrics, tokens, and security keys. And factor reduce risk. So multiple factors, even if one factor is compromised, for example, if your password is compromised, other layers prevent unauthorized access. So if your password is compromised, the user still do not have the code that has been sent to your smartphone. So in this way, MFA is very hard to compromise because it combines multiple factors. Privacy. So privacy refers to the protection of personal information and adherence to laws and policies governing its collection, storage, and use. Effective privacy management ensures compliance, mitigates risk, and respects individual rights. So these are the some terms that are used in the privacy and privacy laws, such as the data subject. The data subject is the individual whose personal information is being collected or processed, such as the citizen or users. For example, a customer whose data is stored by an e-commerce platform. So this customer is known as data subject. Controller versus processor. So controller determines the purpose and means of processing the personal data of the data subject. For example, a retail company managing customer data, or you can say that a bank that has the customer credit cards and accounts number, etc. So the bank or a retailer company is basically the controller. What is then the processor? So processor processes data on behalf of the controller. For example, a cloud service provider hosting the retail's company data. Or you can also say that let's suppose the bank's customers' data is stored inside the cloud. So the cloud that processes the data is the processor. Processor is not the owner, rather than it processes data on behalf of the controller. Ownership of the data. So ownership clarifies who has the authority over data and who is responsible for its security and compliance. For example, organization own operational data but must respect data subject rights over their personal information. Data inventory and retention. So, data inventory is a comprehensive list of all data assets, including the data location and data type. For example, tracking stored customer records, email logs, and billing information. So what is then retention? Retention include the policies for how long data is kept and when it is deleted. For example, retaining employee tax records for 7 years as required by the law. So the retention depends upon the data type and the related regulation or laws that requires the retention of that specific data for a specific period. Another term that is often used with regard to the privacy is the right to be forgotten. So, individuals can request the deletion of their personal data when it is no longer necessary or legally required to retain. For example, a former user requesting the removal of their account information under the GDPR. The GDPR is basically an European law. It stands for General Data Protection Regulation, and it deals with the data subjects or user privacy, data privacy inside the EU. It is a very popular law specifically to the privacy and is applicable inside Europe. So objective 1.2 is understand the risk management process. So elements of risk management process. First one is the risk identification. So risk identification is the process of identifying potential risk that could negatively impact the organization. So it involves gathering input from various stakeholders, reviewing past incidents, and analyzing business processes and evaluating external threats. Risk identification helps create a comprehensive risk register that lists identified risks and their potential impact. Another element of risk management process is the risk assessment, which is the process of evaluating identified risks to understand their likelihood and impact, helping to prioritize them for mitigation. So the first step is obviously identification of the risk, and once they are identified, you need to evaluate the identified risks depending upon their likelihood and impact. And once you do this, then you need to prioritize them for mitigation. Of course, any organization cannot mitigate all the risk at once. So you prioritize the risk depending upon their impact. The high impact and high likelihood risk are mitigated first and then followed by risk having medium impact, medium likelihood, and at the end, risk of low impact and low likelihood. So risk analysis is the process of evaluating identified risks to determine their potential impact and likelihood, helping prioritize them for mitigation. So this is same as the risk assessment. So there are mainly two methods of risk analysis. One is qualitative and the second is quantitative. So this is the qualitative, which is a subjective approach to assess risk based on their likelihood and impact using descriptive categories. For example, low, medium, high. So, in this way, in qualitative, you identify and categorize risk depend on these using these terminology. The risk may be medium, high, or low, and it focuses on expert judgment, brainstorming, and ranking risk without numerical data. Since you do not have any numerical value, let's suppose in the quantitative you have numerical value. For example, if a risk may cost the organization, let's suppose 100K US dollar. So this is quantitative, you have a numerical number. But let's suppose there are certain types of risk where you cannot calculate the risk numerically. For them, then you use the expert judgment and use these terminologies such as the let's suppose the risk of fire is medium or high or low, the risk of tornado is medium, high or low, and so on. So qualitative risk analysis is useful when detailed numerical data is unavailable or unnecessary. So the next is the quantitative risk analysis, which is a data-driven approach that assigns numerical values to risk to calculate potential loss. It uses formulas and metrics like SLE, which is single loss expectancy, annualized loss expectancy, and annual or annualized rate of occurrence. We will study these in a while to prioritize risk. It provides precise insights for decision making and resource allocation. It provides precise insights because you have the exact value in terms of US dollar or money. What is exposure factor? So this is the percentage of an asset's value that is lost due to a specific risk event. For example, if a flood damages 70% of a facility, the exposure factor is 70%. What is SLE? That is single loss expectancy. So it is the expected financial loss from a single risk event. For example, if a flood occurs once a year, then the SLE is 1. Formula for SLE is the asset value multiplied by exposure factor. For example, if a server worth is 10,000 US dollar and it is 50% damage, then the SLE 5,000, because the formula is 10,000 multiplied by 50% is zero point 0.5, which is equal to 5,000. So what is annualized rate of occurrence? So it is the estimated number of times that a specific risk is expected to occur in a year. For example, if a threat happens once every 5 years, the ARO or annualized rate of occurrence is 0.2. 1.5 is the threat is occurring once every 5 years, it is equal to 0.2. And if the threat occurs 5 times a year, then the ARO is 5. So what is annualized loss expectancy or ALE? So it is the projected annual financial loss from a specific risk, and the formula for ALE is SLE multiplied by ARO, that is annualized rate of occurrence. For example, if the SLE is 5,000 and the ARO is 2, that is the threat is occurring twice a year, the ELE is 5,000 by 2, which is 10,000. What is the probability? It is the likelihood that a specific threat will occur expressed as a percentage or a decimal value. For example, 30% or zero point 0.3. Likelihood is similar to probability but often described in qualitative terms like likely, unlikely, very likely, etc. It helps prioritize the risks based on their perceived chance of occurring. What is impact? So, impact is the magnitude of the effect caused by a risk event, including financial, reputational, and operational damages. High impact risks often demand more immediate attention and mitigation. So high impact risks are prioritized first as compared to low impact risks. So what are the risk tolerance and risk appetite? So risk tolerant is the acceptable level of variation in outcomes that an organization is willing to withstand while pursuing its objective. It focuses on the day-to-day operational ability to manage risk without significant disruptions. And risk appetite is the overall level of risk an organization is willing to take to achieve its strategic goals. It helps define the boundaries for decision making and prioritization. So now some risk management or risk treatment strategies. So these are very important and you should be able to differentiate between them. The first risk treatment strategy is the risk transfer, which is shifting the risk to a third party, such as through insurance, outsourcing, or contracts. It reduces the organization's direct responsibility but may involve costs like premium or fees. For example, purchasing cyber insurance to cover data breach losses. Another risk treatment strategy is the risk acceptance, which is choosing to acknowledge and bear the risk without taking specific action to address it, appropriate for low impact or low probability risks that are deemed tolerable. Or you can also say that let's suppose if you want to mitigate a risk and the cost of mitigation is higher than the risk itself, then instead of mitigating the risk, you can simply accept the risk as it is. So the risk acceptance includes exemption. So a formal decision to exclude certain risk from specific policies or controls, often used when the risk is deemed negligible or impractical to address. For example, exempting low-level assets from comprehensive security measures. Another is exception, which is a temporary allowance for a deviation from standard risk policies, typically with additional oversight or conditions. For example, allowing unsupported software temporarily while a replacement is procured. Another risk treatment strategy is risk avoidance. So it is eliminating the risk entirely by discontinuing the activity or process that generates the risk. Best for high impact or high likelihood risks that cannot be mitigated effectively. For example, avoiding certain vendor with a history of data breaches. Another risk treatment strategy is the risk mitigation, which it is basically the most common method, and it is reducing the risk to an acceptable level by implementing controls or measures. It focuses on minimizing the likelihood or impact of the risk, for example, installing a firewall and anti malware software to protect against cyber threats. So, risk reporting. So, risk reporting is the process of documenting and communicating risk related information to stakeholders. It includes details on identified risks, their status, mitigation efforts, and potential impacts. It helps stakeholders make informed decisions and prioritize resources for risk management. So that was all about risk management. And now the objective 1.3 is understand security controls. So in this coming slides, we will discuss different categories and types of security controls and their examples. So these are broad categories of security control, which includes technical, managerial, operational, and physical. So these are the types of control, which are preventive, deterrent, detective, corrective, compensating, and directive. So first of all, let's go through the categories of the security control. The first one is the technical, which is the hardware or software mechanism used to manage access to resources and systems and provide protection for those resources and systems. So technical control, as the name indicates, are technical or are implemented with the help of the technology. Managerial controls are basically policies and procedures, administrative controls defined by an organization's security policy. It uses planning and assessment methods to review the organization's ability to reduce and manage risks. So the operational controls include and help ensure that the day-to-day operations of an organization comply with their overall security, primarily implemented and executed by people. While the physical category of control are security mechanisms focused on providing protection to the facility and real-world objects. So by facility, we means buildings such as a data center, facility or data center building. So now let's go through some example of these security control categories. First one is the technical, which includes encryption, smart cards, passwords, biometric, access control list, that is ACL, firewalls, routers, IDS, and IPS, that is intrusion detection and intrusion prevention system. Managerial controls include policies, procedure, vendor management, hiring practices, background checks, data classification, security training, risk assessment, and vulnerability assessments. Operational controls include backup and recovery procedure. Remember, these are day-to-day tasks or operation performed by individual, which includes backups and recovery procedures, training, change management, configuration management, and media protection. While physical controls include guards, man traps, so these are used for physical access control towards a facility, fences, lights. So fences are again used to control physical access to a facility. Lights are used for physical detection. So you can say this is a detective control. Motion detector, this is also a detective control. Guard dogs, video cameras, alarms, and laptop locks. So these all are physical controls. So this is a summary of the security control categories. So basically the purpose of all the controls are to protect the assets, and this is how they align. So at the very close to the assets are the policies based, which are managerial control. Technical control are basically implemented through technology that include the hardware and software. Operational control are the people doing day-to-day stuff, and physical control are the one which are tangible and touchable, such as fences, man traps, etc. Now, different security control types. First one is the deterrent. So these are deployed to discourage violation of security policies. Preventive controls are deployed to prevent or stop unwanted or unauthorized activity from occurring. Detective controls are deployed to discover or detect unwanted or unauthorized activity. And compensating control provides options to other existing control to aid in the enforcement of security policies. While corrective measures are taken to fix security vulnerabilities or mitigate damage after a security incident has occurred. And directive control are proactive measures designed to guide behavior and enforce compliance with security policies and procedures. So now going through some examples of the security control types. So the deterrent include security guards, lighting, security cameras, separation of duties. security policies, and security awareness training. Preventive controls include fences, locks, biometrics, man traps, alarm system, job rotation, data classification, penetration testing, access control methods, and firewall. So you can see that these control types include multiple categories. Here we can see that this is the technical category, this is physical, and we can also see some managerial as well. So the detective control types are example include the security guards. So as we can see, a single control can include in multiple control types. Security guard is a deterrent as well as a detective. A security guard can detect an intrusion, while a potential intruder, when sees a security guard, will be deterred from entering the facility. Similarly, guard dogs can be both detective as well as deterrent. Motion detector, job rotation, mandatory vacation, audit trails, intrusion detection system, violation reports, and honey pots. Compensating controls include security policies, personal supervision, monitoring, and work task procedures. And corrective controls include backups and restores, patching, antivirus, anti malware, forensic analysis, and disciplinary action. While detective controls includes policies, procedures, standards, guidelines, physical signage, verbal instructions, and contracts and agreements. So as we saw that the controls are basically overlapping. A single controls include in multiple control types. So a single control can be identified as multiple types depending upon the context of the situation. For example, security controls are designed to work together and their function often overlap. For example, a security camera system is both deterrent, deterring unwanted entry, and detective regarding potential security incident for later review. So the context is the classification of a control can depend on how it's implemented and the specific risk that it is addressing. For example, an access control list can be primarily preventive if it blocks unauthorized access, or detective if it mainly logs access for later investigation. So, when let's suppose you are asked inside the exam about a security control type identification, so how will you identify the security control? So, these are some hints. The exam often use specific words or phrases to hint at the control types. For example, the deterrent controls include these type of words such as sign, warning, sign, visibility, and perception. The preventive control may include the words such as access control, authentication, firewall, encryption. Detective may include monitoring, audit, logging, and alerts. When you see the words alternative, backup, and redundancy, then it may be the compensating control. And the corrective control may have the words like backup, restore, and incident response, while the directive control typically include policy, procedures, standards, and guidelines. Objective 1.4, understand the ISC2 Code of Ethics. So ISC2 Code of Ethics purpose is the ISC2 Code of Ethics is a set of principles that guide cybersecurity professionals in maintaining integrity, professionalism, and responsibility while protecting the public, organization, and the profession. So these are four are code of ethic canons, and they are important. you should remember, as well as the order is also important. So protect society, the common good, necessary public trust and confidence, and the infrastructure. Number two is act honorably, honestly, justly, responsibly, and legally. Number three is provide diligent and competent service to principals. And number four is advance and protect the profession. Objective 1.5, understand the governance processes. So, what are the policies? So, these relates to the organizational governance. So, policies are basically formal, high-level statements that define an organization's approach to security and set expectations for behavior and compliance. The purpose of the policies are to establish clear rules and responsibilities to protect assets, ensure regulatory compliance, and mitigate risk. So the characteristics of policies are that the policies are mandatory. So this is important. You should remember that uh, policies are mandatory. Following the policies is a must. They are broad in scope and enforceable across the organization. Example of policies include acceptable use policies, data protection policies, incident response policy, and password policy. So, what is the role of policy in governance? The policies serve as the foundation of the security program, guiding decision making and the development of guidelines and procedures. So another governance structure element is the standard. So what is a standard? It is a detailed mandatory. So remember, policy and standard both are mandatory. So these are mandatory rules that specify consistent methods, criteria, or specification to ensure uniform implementation of policies across an organization. The purpose of the standards are to provide clear, measurable requirements to enforce policies and promote consistency in security practices. So, some characteristics of standards are that they are rigid and prescriptive. Deviations require formal approval. So, deviations from standards require formal approval of the leadership. Example of standards include minimum encryption standards such as AES-256 for sensitive data. So let's suppose if an organization uses this standard, it will be implemented. And as we said that it requires formal approval, let's suppose if due to any reason AES 1 to 8 is used, it will be formally approved from the leadership. So, what is the standard role in governance? So, they translate policies into actionable and enforceable technical or procedure controls to maintain compliance and security objectives. The next terminologies are the procedure. So, procedures are step by step instructions detailing how specific tasks or processes should be performed to comply with policies and procedure. So, the keyword is step by step instruction. And the purpose is to provide clear, actionable guidance for employees to implement security measures effectively and consistently. Characteristics of procedures include they are detailed, task oriented, and specific to role or function, and they are adaptable for operational needs. So, we saw that the standards were rigid, but the procedures are adaptable. Example include steps to configure a firewall, processes for handling security incident, or instructions for onboarding user securely. And their role in governance is to enable practical implementation of policies and standards by guiding day-to-day operations and ensuring adherence. Next is the guidelines. So these are high-level recommendations that outline best practices and frameworks to follow for achieving security objectives. And the purpose is that the guidelines offer direction on how policies and procedures should be implemented to maintain consistent security practices across the organization. And they are flexible. So, unlike policies, guidelines are optional. So, this is a key important term. The policies and standards were mandatory, but the guidelines are not mandatory, they are optional and adaptable, serving as recommendation rather than strict requirements. So you can easily skip the guidelines, but you cannot skip the policies, standards, and procedure. Example includes suggesting encryption method for sensitive data, advising regular updates for software, or recommending access control measures. And guideline role in governance is that it helps bridge the gap between high level policies and specific operational procedures. So again, the governance elements, this is just like a summary slide. So policies are high level statements outlining an organization's security objectives and rules, and they are broad in scope and mandatory. For example, all employees must use strong password. Standard or detailed mandatory rules. There are also mandatory rules specifying uniform methods to enforce policies, provide measurable criteria and technical specifications. Example, password must be at least 12 characters long and include special characters. What is then procedure? It is the step-by-step instructions for carrying out specific tasks to comply with standard and procedure, and these are detailed and task oriented. For example, instructions for resetting a user password securely. And guidelines are recommendations and best practices to guide actions. And these are optional and flexible and not enforceable like standards or policies. For example, it is recommended to use a password manager to store complex password securely. So these elements form just like a pyramid. So procedures are how things should be done. Standards are what standards should be used, and policies are why we need the policies or what is the need of the policy. So these are some policies. Example of the policies. Acceptable use policy, it defines acceptable and prohibited uses of organization resources like networks, devices, and internet access. Information security policies, these are broad policies that outline how the organization protects its data and information system from threats. Business continuity policy ensures critical operations can continue during and after a disruption. Disaster recovery policy specifies how the organization will recover IT system and data after a disaster. Incident response policy establishes processes for identifying, managing, and mitigating security incidents. Software development life cycle or SDLC policy outlines security measures and standards during the development, testing, and deployment of software. And change management policy defines how changes to systems, applications, and configurations are requested, evaluated, approved, and implemented. So now some standard example. So password standard specifies requirements for password creation such as minimum length, complexity, expiration, and reuse prevention. For example, password must be at least 12 characters long and include uppercase, lowercase numbers, and symbols. Access control standards define how access to systems, data, and resources is granted, managed, and revoked, including role based access and least privilege principles. Physical security standard establishes requirements for securing physical locations such as badge access, surveillance cameras, and locked server rooms. And encryption standard specifies algorithms, key lengths, and protocols to protect data in transit and at rest. For example, use AES 256 for sensitive data encryption. Procedures include change management procedure, which provides step-by-step instructions for requesting, evaluating, approving, and implementing changes to systems or processes to minimize the risks and disruptions. Onboarding and off-boarding procedure details how to securely provision and deprovision user accounts, access rights, and equipment during employee hiring and termination. While the playbook is the prescriptive guides for handling specific scenarios such as responding to a phishing attack, managing a malware outbreak, or conducting a forensic investigation. So now some external consideration to the governance, which includes a regulatory consideration, adhere to industry-specific regulations such as HIPAA, GDPR, or PCI DSS to ensure compliance. Regularly monitor regulatory changes to update policies and procedures. Some legal considerations include understand and comply with laws governing data protection, privacy, and cybersecurity, and seek legal counsel to navigate complex jurisdictional requirements. Industry considerations include to follow best practices and standards specific to your industry, such as NIST or ISO 27001, and participate in industry forums to stay updated on emerging threats and solutions. So, external consideration may be local or regional, which align security measures with local or regional data protection and cyber security laws. Consider the cultural and infrastructural factors impacting security in the region. National in comply with national cybersecurity framework such as CISA in the US or ANISA in the EU. Stay informed about government mandated security requirements and initiatives. Global, so these are address cross border data transfer regulations and international security standards, monitor global cybersecurity trends, and collaborate with international organizations for threat intelligence.